think. Here we go. And we're live. Hello, everyone. So today I am very pleased to have Dr. Scott Walter with us, and Dr. Know-It-All, aka Dr. John Gibbs, with us to discuss the new design revelations that we have about the Robotaxi and the $25,000 car. For those of you who may be sleeping under a rock, there have been a number of articles that have come out recently that are all based on Walter Isaacson's book, and then the book dropped on Tuesday. And so there's a lot of information that has come through in those articles in the book that are extremely detailed. And so we've got some pictures, we've got some descriptions, and so we're just going to go through that. And then we're also going to look at Dr. Know-It-All actually had a video 3 years ago that he kind of envisioned what a $25,000 Tesla could look like. And so he thought through all of the design considerations that we're going to have to go into that and kind of put together a model. And so we're going to look at that a little bit just to see how that compares with where they are, and then brainstorm and see what we think we can take away from this, and as far as where we think that the Robotaxi and the $25,000 car will come in. So, all right. And yeah, with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and we'll just bring up the first of the images and let y'all have at it.
All right. So I don't know, Scott, you want to go first? Do you want me to, or?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess the first thing is thanks for inviting us on, Hans. Yeah. And for those of you who saw the original thumbnail, my name is not Dr. Know-It-All Scott Walter, which is what the thumbnail kind of implied. It was supposed to say Dr. Know-It-All and Scott Walter. All right. However, I have been called a know-it-all on more than one occasion. And again, I mean, this is like a nice sneak peek that we get from Walter Isaacson's book of, behind the scenes, what's going on. We don't know if this is the actual design or some prototype from years ago, or whether it's extremely recent. But it's rather some interesting design elements. And I think the first shocker was like, it's a two-seater. And, and I that's a little bit out of left field, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised because we keep on speculating what these robotaxis are going to look like, what's the form factor going to be, everything else. And I'd like to know, did anyone actually say, all right, we've got a two-seater on our bingo card for that?
That was for Aptera. Aptera was supposed to be the two-seater,
Yeah. And, and I think, the more and more you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. It doesn't mean that's going to be the only robotaxi. There could be others, but for a lot of what taxis are supposed to do in certain environments, maybe 80-90% of use case is one or two passengers. And then someone was saying that, a lot of Uber drivers are saying that 95% of their riders are single riders. And so that tells you can. And then of course the argument was, yeah, but what about if we got four people, get two taxis. So, kind of problem solved that way. It doesn't mean there won't be a four-seater or a van or something like that later on. But if you really look at the market, it may make sense. And when you make it that small, your battery pack can be pretty small as well. So that means you can scale up and make a lot more of these things. So the size of the battery pack is going to be nothing else. So I think the only concern I would have, or anyone else, is if it's like a teeny weeny little smart car kind of thing like that, and I have to take the highway to get to the airport, I might be a little bit nervous going up against some of these SUVs. So you want to make sure it's there. That's the problem with a car that's too small, is that the feeling is that, but then again, we know Teslas can really take a hit and not much is going to go wrong. And they may have taken some creature comforts out of the car that may actually be in there because it's hard to tell whether they're pre-reclined seats, as they like to say in the airplane business. But it looks like you're going to have so much knee room, it may not matter. Or maybe it might be one of those things where the seats slide forward, because I know that's a trick they do in airlines now, that rather than having the seat recline back, you kind of slide it forward. That way you're not going into the luggage compartment. And, you never know about that. One of the seats might be able to come completely forward if you need to put like a lot of luggage in there or something that's a little bit odd. But it's an interesting design. It's certainly, as John has pointed out, if that's the way the door is really going to open and close, that's rather novel, because it might be a lot easier to make a mechanism that closes on its own there are mechanisms out there that will open up doors, at least rear doors. I've seen those things. You probably do something with a front door, but this might be a lot easier to open and close like a hatchback. So when the rider walks away, they don't go, I'm not going to close the door on you. But then again, you just make it part of the security deposit. If the car's not clean, you don't close the door, you get hit another $50. So there might be some way to get good behavior out of the drivers. And again, when I'm looking at this particular one, I think it was Bradford Ferguson who said, hey, that looks an awful lot like the Giga Beer bottle sideways. So that Cybertruck-ish kind of look that's in there. And again, the big discussion is like how many wheels in the back. I don't think it's a three-wheeler. I don't think they'll ever make a three-wheeler. The only thing is that the two wheels in the back, maybe they're a little bit more to the center, but not all the way to the center. It might just be a tab, because if it comes in too much, now suddenly you don't have any storage space. It eats into your trunk. So you would like to have them out. But from that, it looks like, the concern is aerodynamics, because again, small car, probably small battery. You want it to be extremely efficient. Better looking wing design than the Cybertruck. I mean, it's not straight. It's got more of that curved feel, and the way that everything's going over the back, it's like you almost don't need a spoiler. In many ways, it looks like it's going to have a really low coefficient of drag.
Yeah, so Scott, with the unboxed process and the way that they're planning to put this together in such a modular way, do you think that there's opportunity to make both 2-seat and 4-seat configurations on the Gen 3 platform architecture? Or would you see probably that's a stretch too far, that the overall footprint of the 2-seater is too small to efficiently accommodate such a, going up to that 4-seat size?
This might be interesting. For some of you, this might be a little bit of breaking news that Jordan Giesedy of The Limiting Factor tweeted something out today saying that Tesla is thinking of having a single casting. They're actually working in that area from sources, undisclosed sources, but evidently and I think it was one of the mainstream media outlets kind of reported something like that. So they may be heading that direction. The thing is, like, single casting. We're not talking about like a single front or rear. We're talking like the whole thing, the runners and all that, which it was a head scratcher, because like, well, wait a minute, what about the structural battery pack? Now, I don't think you could pull off a single casting for like Highlander Model 3. It's just too big. But this might be the right size. So if you're thinking of doing that, then that means, okay, this is the one they're thinking of doing a single casting. Now, the other thing about it was the way things were worded is that when they say single casting, it might be they're going to be able to cast all the parts in a single casting, which is very different than it being a single casting. Because if you're having to do a front and a rear and they're done in separate gigapresses, that means you have to have 2 gigapresses. If you can press them both at the same time, you can do that. And that way you're able to get your production rate to be twice as high as what it normally would be. Because that is the limiting factor on how fast this factory is running. It goes right down to the gigapress. So you want to be able to use them sparingly and properly. So I don't know that you could make a 4-seater out of it if the idea is to make it a single cast. But there should be ways to extend it. I mean, limos do that all the time. They figure out a way to kind of stretch them, and there could be a way of doing that. So I'm sure there's other designs for that. And everyone keeps on saying, but we're gonna have a 4-seater Robotaxi. It's like, yeah, it's called Model Y. All right. And maybe that's the whole thing. It's, so this may be brilliant. The more I think about it, is everyone's just thinking, oh, I'm going to be competing against Tesla for the Robotaxi market. It's like, no, you're not. Someone wants a 4-seater, they're going to use your car. If it's a single rider or 2-rider, then they just use the Tesla car. So in a sense, they realize, there's a completely separate market, and we're not stepping on those people who are the owners. And then if there aren't enough taxis out there to do the single ride, well, then they can get a 4-seater Model Y.
Yeah. I will jump in here that I am very strongly convinced that we will not see this car on the road. So because if nothing else, because Tesla would never allow Walter Isaacson to scoop them. So, they're not going to put out their actual design of the car into the book. And I am highly convinced that they are not going to do a 3-wheel car. And that definitely looks like a 3-wheel car. So I could be proven wrong. And again, maybe they will do this someday when they make their Indian factory and they make cars for that market. But I just don't see a car that small for a US market or for a European market. I think they're going to go with a 4-seater hatchback.
I would see it in the European market.
You could see that in the European market. You think that?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. There's Italy for sure. I mean, it's all places in Italy.
Yeah.
A lot of villages in France, even in Germany. There's a lot of places that I think it would work quite well.
Right. Okay.
The streets are definitely narrower in the cities and everything else. Parking is sparse, so
right.
it would work. You know, remember the problem with the Cybertruck? It's too big for Europe.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so they have to make it so it would work. But yeah, I think you were right. Is it might make sense in like more sense in an Asian market, South America, and some other places. But it will also work in a few places in the U.S. I mean, I was surprised when you go to Seattle. It's a very European city, and everyone prefers driving the smaller versions of SUVs and not the really big ones.
Right.
And I felt the same way that just the way the streets are going around Seattle, you feel better in a slightly smaller car than a bigger one.
I mean, the argument for a 2-seat vehicle or a small vehicle makes complete sense if it's just a robo-taxi. Like that there is a sense to that. But even if you go to the one, Hans, if you go to the picture of Franz instead of the cardboard model, like here, so whether or not that's 1 or 2 tires, it's definitely way back. It's like been offset. So it's a very small amount of trunk space. And it looks like those 2 suitcases in there are the overhead bin airplane ones, not full size check your luggage suitcases, which means, you know, if you think like, okay, a standard use for a taxi is take me and my partner, spouse, whatever, to the airport with a couple of checked bags. And this car is not big enough for that. You can't have 2 people plus 2 checked bags plus backpacks and things like that. So
depending on what they do for a frunk up here. And as I look at this, I really do think that this is 4 wheels, because if you look, I think that wheel is actually taller than the floor that they have the 2 suitcases on there. And so I'm fairly certain that those are 2 wheels, and they're just brought in for aerodynamics.
Just a little bit.
I don't know if there's a picture on the side. Like if you look on the side of the picture that bottom right one, that's pretty recessed. And that seems to be a pretty similar shape. That's I mean, I do agree. I think it's 2 separate wheels, not 1, and there's probably a motor between them, but that really reduces the amount of trunk space you have. I looked at the Aptera, and I love the Aptera design, but when you actually open it up, there's not that much trunk space in there because of what they did with the wheel design. So anyway, the big thing for me is that I just can't imagine Elon Musk and Tesla going like, yeah, you get the scoop. So I'm thinking, you know, clearly this was a design and clearly they worked on it, but I just don't think that's the design. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
I would agree with that. And then especially when we come forward to, if I go back to the here, this is what we were shown at shareholder day.
Right.
And this was after they talked about the unbox process and the next gen platform. And, you know, one of the other things that we can see now looking at this, now that the Highland is out, is some of those lines look very similar to the lines that we now see on the Highland Model 3. And so it, you know, this almost looks like it's going, when Elon says a futuristic Cybertruck-like design, that sounds to me like maybe he's talking about something that's a cross between Cybertruck futurism and brutalism and the Model 3 in a smaller form factor.
Right.
Yeah, I agree on that. And the thing with this is that's not Cybertrucky, because the windshield doesn't go all the way to the front bumper.
Right.
And with that Robotaxi version, they were able to really take it to the extreme there, and also maybe give it a little bit of curvature just for certain aerodynamic type of purposes. I agree that's not the $25,000 car we're looking at there. That could be the Robotaxi though. Certainly, you know, or they're working on the idea that maybe it just needs to be a 2-seater.
Yeah.
When you say that's not the $25,000 car, you're talking about this design right here, or this one?
That one. That's probably not the $25,000 car.
Honestly, that looks like a $15,000 to $18,000 car to me.
Yes.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if it's a car that you can buy, that's
Right.
the Robotaxi design that they're able to do. So I think that is more like what is going to be the Robotaxi, whereas the other one is going to be that $25,000 car that looks more like a Model 3 or more like the Highland, because it looks like it has a frunk, because it's not clear this thing even has a frunk. The way it may be designed, it seems like they've got a big bumper in the front. I'm not sure if that's just for crash protection or if it's actually has any utilization. Otherwise, just get rid of it.
Right.
Sculpt that down a little bit more, or move some things a little bit forward in a way so you get a little bit more of that trunk space. Because you're right, but then it's notorious. It's like every time I take a taxi, there's never any room for anything.
Yeah.
It's like you try to go and it's like, whoop, there's nothing in there. There's really no room to put anything. A lot of times, sometimes you actually have to bring the luggage in the car with you.
Right. Right.
So
that is true.
Then you begin to wonder, well, that would be kind of, weird solutions of being able to tow something that you throw your luggage in.
Right.
You see a lot of ski buses do stuff like that, you actually can't bring the skis in the bus, but they actually have a dedicated trailer for that.
Right.
So if you are doing something that runs the airport, maybe there is some other thing you can do, or a stretch version.
It's the thing that just amazes me is how this car is almost entirely human passenger space. Because if you look at a normal car, it's got like a big gas engine. So there's a big front. You've got 2 rows of seating, which means you've, extended that out. And then there's a big trunk in the back. And this is, if you look at the sort of skeletonized version of it, the cardboard one, like the people's feet stick all the way to where that front tire is. So it's mostly seat, which is pretty impressive, like to be able to maximize that room, human occupancy room, and minimize everything else. The rest of it is what's the minimum amount of space that I need to design to make this occupiable by 2 human beings. So small children in it, but I don't know, man.
It doesn't look like there's a back seat, at least in the original design.
Back seat. Yeah, no, I think maybe for airbags. That actually is interesting. Oh yeah.
But we also don't have a dashboard right in front either. No. It looks like, and so that's a great question.
And you've got a lot of legroom in there, a lot of legroom in that original design. It was hard to tell if you could kind of cram some sort of rear seat in the back like they've done in some of the other models for smaller passengers or not. That might be possible, and then maybe is more in line with John's sort of original design from, what was it, 2-3 years ago, of the Cybertruck Robotaxi mashup.
I went back and checked.
Where you're kind of looking at that July 20. Wow, that's over 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's also kind of an idea of what you might be able to do in those extended circumstances where you need to have all 4 riders in there, and it might be no, you're not going to have 4 adults, but you might be able to have 2 adults and 2 preteen children, something like that. That might be able to fit in there with something else. And then it's the question of whether everything kind of moves forward. But I think it really comes down to is they're trying to, you can't please all the people all the time, kind of thing. So they're looking at what's the 80% use case, and they're probably finding from Uber and Lyft and everything else. Because look at it, more than 90% of driving is people driving alone to work and back every day. So they're looking at that. And again, that's what the Uber drivers are seeing, is that it's mostly just one person.
Well, and if the economics are right, it could still be cheaper for 4 different people to ride in 4 different Ubers if everyone's got luggage and stuff that they've got to pull along. And
Again, it kind of, which in some ways kind of defeats the whole purpose of like, oh, great, more vehicles on the road. It's like, it wasn't that the whole idea was to get the cars off the road, and now we're going to have 4 cars going to JFK rather than 1. Great. I'll
take my example from last weekend, because I took 4 or 5 Uber rides while I was in Vancouver, and like one was from the airport, so I did have a piece of luggage, but it was a small piece of luggage. And then the rest of them were just me and the driver. So in all of those circumstances, that size vehicle would have worked perfectly fine. So it's not going to be perfect for, it's not going to be perfect for every circumstance, but it would certainly be. And that's most of my Uber rides. It's very rare that there's like a whole family trying to cram into an Uber or something.
Yeah. And it's not like you're going to put the normal limousine services out of business, because they will be around for just that reason.
Yeah.
And the majority of people that come into the airports are businessmen. They're not flying with anyone else. And in many cases, they either want to take a taxi because it makes more economic sense, or an Uber now because it's a lot cheaper,
Right.
or they go
Yeah.
rent a car because it's cheaper than, the taxi fare and everything else. And they
Right.
rent the car and it sits in a parking lot the whole time they're there, and then they go back.
Right.
So you come up with something like that, you're addressing a certain particular business case, which is going to be very lucrative. And I think also beneficial because it does kind of, makes it cheaper for businesses to be able to operate, and probably take some of the cars off the road, the rent-a-car fleet and everything else. It's just
Right.
going to be more efficient. So
I
there's a market for that.
I think, and you have to remember that it's not like Tesla doesn't make other vehicles. They
Mhm.
they will have Model Ys on the road, whether it's us who own them, who loan them out as
Yeah.
robotaxis, or they just purpose build those. But whatever it is, if you need a larger car, and Cybertrucks eventually too. So, you've got everything from a pickup truck to haul some lumber from the hardware store down to, I just got to get myself to the airport with a piece of luggage. So sizing makes sense to have a very, very small car that's very inexpensive and
What they
low cost
yeah.
per mile too, for a user.
What they may do is the feeling has been, again, going back to your design, is that you need to ruggedize the Robotaxi because of all
Yes.
the wear and tear and how it's just going to get beat on and everything else, just to make sure it can kind of survive. And, if you say, well, our 4-seater solution is a Model 3 or the Model Y, it may be that it's going to get a lot of abuse
Right.
and dinged up, and maybe just say, yep, that's it. Because you already have a lot of taxis like that already. Or they somehow use the Model 3 and the Model Y as a platform to come up with yet another version, an offshoot, super rugged, super tough version of that.
Yeah.
That they might do it. But
Yeah.
the more you're talking about, it's like they have a 4-seater solution. It's the 3 and the Y.
Yeah.
And potentially the X if they wanted to go down that route.
Right.
And they realize that, but we need a 2-seater version.
Right.
That makes more sense. So that's why they're designing that for 2 seats, because they say, we don't have one. What would a
Yeah.
2-seater look like?
Yeah.
So the more we talk about
But-
it, the more I'm convinced they're going to come out with a 2-seater one.
Right.
now,
But
because they have a 3-seat
I guess
version or
I
a 4-seat
agree
version.
with you, but I don't agree that that's going to be the first Robotaxi design. I think it's going to be a 4-seater Robotaxi design will be the first one, which is a more because they said specifically, right? He said they're going to build it on the same assembly line for the $25,000 car and the Robotaxi. So it makes more sense to have it. But I think ruggedized is the critical term.
Right.
It's
right.
going to be
And-
something that can take a beating.
And,
Like
and maybe the one
literal
with the
beating.
weird profile
Yeah.
that we saw, maybe that is the ruggedized version
Right.
that they're
Right.
looking at. That will be very cheap and very easy to put together.
Right.
And again, getting to that unbox process, I guess I was kind of shocked to see the teardown that was done. Was it at the Detroit Auto Show that it was sort of shown by another company that's very much like Monroe and Associates that does the teardowns, and how he was able to show, you want to assemble a Model Y? He's like, just come over here, drop this thing here, and there's a couple of bolts, and do this, and like everything's easily accessible that a child could almost put it together.
Right.
And so, and that's already the current way that they do manufacturing and production.
Right.
So it's practically got all the elements you want for like an unboxed process in that sense of the ease to put it together. And also everyone keeps on saying it's like, well, that would be really easy for a humanoid robot to come over. And yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Bulky wrists
Hello.
and cables, doesn't matter. You just kind of come over with a socket wrench and just go like this, because everything was top down rather than coming in from the
Right.
sides or underneath or having weird access coming back. So it's like, yeah, all this stuff is really designed and heading in the direction that they will be able to drive that cost down.
Yeah.
Well, and
exactly.
going back to Jordan's tweet about the single, quote unquote, single casting, I had, kind of gone down that road in my thinking quite a ways and kept thinking about, how could you cast it all in a single piece? But that was really shattered on Battery Day, or not Battery Day, at Investor Day when they talked about the unbox process, because you need those parts to actually be separate so that they can proceed through the different stations. And so, yeah, like if you're looking at this, you need your rear casting, you need your front casting, you need your structural battery pack, potentially the rocker arms and the inner frame, whether you're doing, even if you were going to make currently they're not doing the body side outers or inners as castings. Those are all stampings, and extrusions, I think, in some limited places. But even if you wanted to convert those to castings, you would still have them be separate pieces. But like you said, you could shoot that as a single casting that has multiple different parts. So all of those parts are cast, boom, in one shot. Then they're taken out of the mold. The mold will have a spot for each one of the front, rear rockers, whether they do the pillars or not. All of that would just be extracted from the mold at one time in all of the different pieces, and then they would be sent out to their different stations to begin assembly work for that module, whether it's a side, whether it's a front, whether it's a rear. And so I think that's the thing that makes the most sense in order to actually assemble in the unbox process.
Yeah. Now Jordan, he tried to throw a little bit of shade on that because he was a bit skeptical himself. And part of it was, the most obvious thing, well, wait a minute, if you do that, then what about the structural battery pack? That was the whole idea that's going to come in there. Now, I don't know if the structural battery pack has the rockers sort of built into it or not, or whether it's something separate. The other thing that was brought up is that if you cast it out of aluminum and the rockers would then also be aluminum for crash testing and everything else, the feeling is that's usually like a high tensile strength steel that goes in there. So like the Tesla is aluminum where it can be, and wherever you need to have the strength for crash protection and everything else, you have the stainless steel. So again, it was like, that doesn't make sense. Of course, I've then referred to Sandy's sledgehammer video. It's like, well, these castings are tougher than you think. And yeah, I'd agree, but I'm not so sure when it comes to the rocker. That might have to be something else. So when they say single cast, it might mean, yeah, we're going to do the front and rear in one press.
Right.
And then it pops out and then everything gets assembled.
Let me throw a little bit of a weird wrinkle in this. If you have a structural battery pack in the middle, because one of the problems with putting three parts together is that it's the fitment, right? And you have to kind of wiggle it around and get them to fit properly. What if you did the traditional front and traditional within the past year or so, front and rear casting, but then you just had rails that you would put the structural battery pack in. So essentially it was all connected together. So there was no having to,
that's what the rockers would be. Yeah,
exactly.
So
but you just do it all as one piece, but it's just thin rails, and you drop the structural battery pack with any kind of steel I-beams or anything like that that's there for crash protection as part of that.
And the question is whether the rockers are like part of the structural battery pack or something like that takes the place of it, or is it in the side panels? Because you look at those side panels, potentially down there, those could be the rockers that you need. So all that could be pre-built in. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's some kind of framing mechanism that's going to go in there. But yeah, I mean, the structural battery pack, the whole point of that is that it's just, they kept on talking about the rigidity and the strength that you just get out of that thing. That's going to be the main thing to carry all the load and everything else. And it's almost like you don't need the rockers because it's all going right through that pack.
Yeah, it's mostly in my mind a construction. It's not an actual piece of the frame. It's just something that holds it all together until you put the structural battery pack in it. So it's just something that makes it easier.
You take it out.
Or it's just not important. It's just a thin rail. So it's not that.
That would just be kind of your the fixturing you part of your tooling.
Exactly.
To line everything up, and then it kind of comes off.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think most of that stuff should fit together pretty well, or they will have like a framing station that holds it, because everything should just be so dimensionally perfect they pop in right. Because otherwise, if you have to attach that thing on there and deattach it, it's like, what's an extra process you have to go through? So they might be able to make it just from a really good fixturing station. And again, we don't know how the boxing process works, because right now we're seeing that the whole battery pack is going to come up afterwards, almost after everything is together, right? The whole body and white, but what we don't have. So they already have some kind of rails, which is probably the side rails on the body panels that holds the whole thing together. Because remember, the seats and everything come up afterwards, because they end up going right on there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like here they've got the front and rear casting kind of attached with the side body panels first.
Yeah.
And then, like you said,
and then I think so they probably already have some rails that are going to be in there. So maybe they could do it as a single casting. Who knows?
If they can, I mean, holy mackerel. it's going to make the thing spit out like a Pez dispenser. I mean,
Well,
it's just going to be like,
yeah.
ching, 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 like cars coming out.
But it's also going to be huge. And one thing that Jordan said, in order
Yeah.
to do that in one piece, you would need probably like a 12-ton.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Holy
again,
crap.
unless
12,000
they actually
ton.
do decide to
9,000 ton they
go.
already?
Yeah, if they do decide to go with the 2-seater instead of the 4-seater, that
Yeah,
makes everything
yeah,
a
it
lot
would
smaller.
fit.
So yeah,
It would fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now, as far as the cost, so you do say in the title, a $25,000 car, which is what Tesla has teased for a long time. And yeah, it was about, I think almost last week, Thursday last week, I was at the Florida Autonomous Vehicle Summit in Tampa, and the keynote speaker was Kathy Wood. And it was very interesting what she said. And she was talking about Wright's Law and everything else and how it's going on. And she said, the analysts have been looking at what the price is going to be for everything. And of course, one example of Wright's Law is what Tony Seba was saying. He predicted 10 years ago, what the price of batteries is going to be. And he nailed it, September 23rd, right where I said it was going to be. It was going to break $100, right at that point. And so Kathy was talking about, where Wright's Law is and everything else, and that she wasn't quite sure the number. And one of her analysts was actually in the audience, and she said, someday we believe, Tesla will get to an $18,000 car. And he corrected her. And he said, no, 15. So, 15,000. That's what the number is, 15. So, yeah. And now I've actually heard within the past week, I don't know if that's where it started, but a lot of other people have sort of brought up that, potentially a $15,000 car in there, especially after looking at Franz's picture with the 2-seater. Everyone goes, that's a $15,000 car right there, easily.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with that. Yeah.
Yep.
So
you're in good company. You said 15,000. I don't know if it was one of those things subliminally planted in your brain because you saw my tweet of that, or again, it's just like minds think alike.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just looking at it. It's like, no, this thing's just it should cost less than that, especially if it doesn't even have a steering wheel and pedals and stuff. It's a single small motor. Doesn't have to be fast. It's
small battery pack.
Small battery pack, simple frame.
Which doesn't matter because, according to Tony Seba, batteries almost don't cost anything now.
Right. Well, but it's, and also if Tesla doesn't sell it, it really isn't that price car, but it costs them that much to build it, which means that you make profit on that really fast. It doesn't take a long time to make a profit on a $15,000 item. So, yeah.
Well, and one of the things to note is that I think a lot of those prices, a lot of times, are international prices, or they're prices that factor in cars made for global markets. And yeah, a lot of companies have gotten away from these small cars in the US because crash tests are so difficult now to pass, and it just requires a lot more in those small vehicles, which makes them a lot harder to make a profit on. And so we only have, a couple automakers that even play in that segment anymore. But that will be one of the really interesting concerns to see, is this a car at that size that Tesla can bring to the US market and have the safety that the US market will demand, at least, until robo-taxis are so prolific on the roads that we see crash incidents going way, way down.
I think that the design of this car, at least front and rear crash, because it doesn't have rear seats, it's got an effectively huge crumple zone front and back. But the sides, I guess the sides would be the question, and that should come down to, if it's a structural battery pack, that should be very rigid. But yeah, I don't know if you go to that the render of this, because it doesn't really have a B pillar. It's got kind of like it's got like a angled thing. So that's not really a rigid B pillar. So that's where the question of I don't think it's a problem front and back. I think it'll be fine that direction, but the side crash protection could be.
It could be in the door that we just don't see it because the door's up, but they may have some kind of pillar or protection mechanism built right in there, because that's a pretty big door.
It is. It's huge.
I mean, that's
DeLorean
that's a nice
size.
door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Very, very easy to get in and out. For sure.
And I appreciate that. The older I get, the more I appreciate easy
Optimus would actually be able to get into there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
He'll tear up the seats, but he'll be able to get his head in there.
All right. Let's do a quick review here on the concept. So for those that don't know, this is a design that Dr. Know-It-All put together over 3 years ago now. And he just thought through from first principles the criteria that Tesla might be considering and what they were trying to accomplish with this vehicle. And this is what he put together. And, there's a lot of similar, other than the fact that we've got 2 seats in the rear that are rear facing, a lot of the elements that are involved here are also carried over into the designs that we've been reviewing there that, at least at some point Franz was considering in the design concepts. And so, why don't you go ahead and kind of give us a little bit of your updated thoughts on this design, John, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, obviously the big ticket thing was the rear facing rear seat, which there's a question of how legal that is. So whether it's legal in the US or not, I mean, there are third row seating even in the Model Y that is a jump seat that's backwards. So anyway, for me, this came down to the first principles of you're going to make this thing indestructible as possible. This was previous to the Robotaxi, by the way. So you'll see the guy is driving in the front seat. So the idea was an inexpensive $25,000 car, and it was how small of a vehicle size. And I went off the Mini Cooper in terms of the size, but the Mini Cooper is not aerodynamic because it's got a flat back because of the seating the 2 people in the rear. So I thought, well, if you flip the seating around, you can actually make this much more aerodynamic by having the shape be more like this. Obviously, this is much more severe than Franz's design for the 3-wheeler or whatever it is. This Robotaxi thing that's in the book is much more beautiful than what I did. But anyway, the idea was kind of the brutalist Cybertruck looking design, taking cues from that, and having the doors both open towards the B pillar, which is very, very prominent in this car, because I was thinking about, rollover and crash worthiness and having a very, very strong. So that the idea, I don't know if you can spin it around, but the idea is that the top would also have, it would kind of continuously go around there. So there'd be glass going up, and then there would be, I don't know if there's a spin around someplace. And I do want to get to that other part too. Yeah, you can see that the top in this is actually, and oh my gosh, I don't have so much gray hair anymore. It was a while back. But if you look at the top is steel. So the idea was that this structural battery pack, it was completely steel around. So it was an exceptionally strong roll cage, and that the doors opened like this. So front and back doors both opened away from that B pillar camera, or B pillar, not camera, but anyway. So, and then the other part was that the back seats would fold down, and what they would do instead of folding on top of themselves is actually slide away and go like this to make a very, very flat space for you to put things on. Again, I was trying to come up with the most versatile thing I could think of, which is a hatchback design. And, in my mind, it's always, can you fit a 2x4 8-foot piece of lumber in a vehicle? And I can't remember if I had this exactly right, but I think I could get really close to 8 feet if you went straight from the back to the front and had the seats down and went through the seat. You couldn't do it just in the back, but it was pretty close to that. So, yeah.
Well, the question I have for you, John, is can you get 2 check bags and 2 carry-ons in there?
You can. I actually, if you go forward, there's actually a thing.
I know you had the storage between the seats, but I wasn't sure if there's any.
Well, no, but if you put so there's the storage between the seats, but then if you take those back seats and fold them flat, you can put a huge amount of stuff back there. I have another version of it. If you go later in the video, I think, there you go. They back it down. And then there's one that actually shows a bunch of stuff packed on top of it. So anyway, that's go a little bit further back. It should be relatively close after that image. So
Wait a minute, you suddenly aged or got younger
maybe not.
there. In the
Yeah,
same
I
video.
know. There's like different versions of it. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's it. That was the one right there. So it's a little bit not clear, but if you fold those seats down, you could put a whole bunch of bags and things on top of there. So there's a lot of room actually in that version.
Can
Anyway.
you fold down? Oh, but you can't fold down the front seats.
No. But what you take is you take the seat and you fold it flat in the back. No,
Yeah,
the front
I'm
seats,
just thinking
the front
if,
seats
if
don't
you
fold.
fold away all the seats, it can just be pure cargo.
Well, yeah, this
It's
was
a
like I said,
Robotaxi. You just
this was previous to the
fill it up with
Robotaxi.
pizzas or whatever. Send it to
Exactly.
its destination.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then that's great. But this was pre-Robotaxi. This was 2020. We really weren't that close to Robotaxis yet. But yeah, if you took away the steering wheel, you could just fold the front seats down too, and you could just turn it into a gigantic cargo thing. So yeah.
I think Walter mentioned in his interview with Lex Friedman that the El Camino was one of the design inspirations that they were thinking about in their old $25,000 car Robotaxi design brainstorming sessions.
Yeah, so it's not the most beautiful car in the world, but it actually was relatively. It was pretty cool. It did a lot of jobs reasonably well. And I think the problem was that people were like, I want it to do one job well, not a bunch of them. But a Robotaxi is a different design. It does need to be, it can sacrifice beauty for functionality and generality. I think that's important to think about.
Cool. So is there anything else that we want to hit? If I go back to here, were there any elements that we wanted to bring out from any of these other pictures that we haven't really discussed yet? So I know we started there.
Well,
and
I think the big thing is the finishing. So it at least in these things, and it's always hard to tell because it's a black and white rendering, but they sure seem to be indicating that they are thinking more, not that one, but the other ones seem to indicate that they're thinking about stainless as as an exterior coating.
It's
whether
very
or
flat.
not that's, yeah, it's very flat, it's very silvery. It would make sense because if you want to ruggedize something, like paint is the last thing you want. Because all it takes is a guy walking by and just, and you got a big giant scrape, a key down the side of your paint. If you do that with a stainless steel thing, yeah, it might scratch it a little bit, but it's not going to matter.
I think what did James Dalma say?
Yeah.
That no one's, if they try keying it, they're going to ruin the key.
Right, exactly.
Oh, my key doesn't work anymore. It's like,
It'll sandpaper
and then
it down.
I think Elon replied to that and says, oh yeah, actually we could put like a tungsten coating on there. There'd be no scratch whatsoever.
Right.
Oh,
exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
Ultra hardcore steel.
I mean, the other thing about it is we don't know whether it's necessarily stainless steel because it's flat. I think they might be going to the flat design as well because they are so easy to wrap. I mean, if your whole idea is like get rid of paint, but then we somehow industrialize the whole wrapping process, that would just be a lot easier.
So what's your thought, Scott? I know we've had this discussion a number of times on their ability to do paint or not do paint and have wraps. It seems like Tesla will basically have an array of options at their fingertips for, maybe on the Robotaxis, they don't want paint, but maybe on the $25,000 car, they want to offer a low cost, no paint option, or you could get a select number of paint colors. Because Lars specifically mentioned that they would do paint as part of the unbox process, but that doesn't mean that every car that is constructed with the unbox method necessarily has to be painted.
Right.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's not so much that things have to be painted, but some things may need to be coated. So that they're not the whole thing is not stainless steel, but there are going to be some components that need to have a little bit of corrosion resistance in there. So you wouldn't have the full blown paint shop because that's the really expensive and difficult part is the robots that are going over there trying to get that. It's let's say Tesla is sending out confusing signals when it comes to paint, because in one sense it's like, oh, we don't want to use paint anymore. And the other, they've got the best paint shop in the world right now, and they're coming out with these new colors and they're just talking about how good the painting process is. And I'm like, okay, so which is it? And it might be that's it. That's the end of the road. They'll do some great things over in Berlin. And then those will be, let's say, the very bespoke or, unique ones that they're able to upcharge a lot for because it's the only one. And then the rest of the world is like, no, we don't make painted Teslas anymore. Or they go to the wrap process. And the other thought has been how much of things can be made out of plastic instead. So that's the other option. And the thing with plastic is that you can color it and come up with a variety of different colors. And if you think that's not possible, Saturn already did it back in the 90s. They were a little bit knocked on it, that it wasn't necessarily the greatest, but the thing is, plastic technology has improved a lot since then. So there's a lot of other ways that you can put pigmentations in there. That'd be pretty nice. And one of the biggest hits on it was that you still had some parts of the outer body that couldn't be plastic, that had to be metallic, like the some of the enclosures. And so you had to get the paint to match the plastic. And that was a little bit of a trick, because you could notice the difference, because I think the plastic didn't fade at all, whereas the rest of the car would. So those were always the elements, because people were obsessing on perfect paint match and everything else, and panel gaps and all this other stuff, that people obsess over, when for the most part, all I want is a car that can reliably get me from A to B and just doesn't look like a junker. But that's it. If it's got a little panel gap or something like that, I'm not going to fret over it, as long as it's safe and runs and doesn't have to go into the shop all the time. And I think 90% of the people are kind of there as well.
Right. I'll throw in also that when we do get to an actual Robotaxi, do you care if you get an Uber or a taxi, what it is? No. The only reason
I only get in the blue ones. I refuse to take any other color Uber.
But I'm just saying, like, unless you have a lot of luggage or something, in which case you do care. But for the most part, it's like you don't care, as long as the thing doesn't look like it's about to fall apart and you're going to die in an accident. It's the wheel's going to come off and you're going to fall. You're like, it's fine. You're like, okay, fine. I'm just taking this car for 15 minutes. What do I care? So I think people have a much lower bar for acceptability in a car that, if you're paying $40,000, then you're like, yeah, I want this thing to look, but if I'm going to ride in this for 10 minutes, I could care less what it looks like. So, yeah.
And I agree with the last commenter there, that if your intention is to wrap your car to begin with, there should be a no paint option. Now, there may be some experts out there say, well, especially with stainless steel, it may be that you need still some protective coating to prevent, rust and corrosion from happening in there. But, maybe it's, just give me it with a primer. That's all I care. Or, it's just some very basic color that a wrap is able to go over without color bleed through or anything like that. So
actually,
those would be options.
We should take a hint from Apple, and we should make it out titanium now. So we'll have the iPhone 15 version of this.
Yeah.
I want my titanium Cybertruck.
But again, there are probably certain colors or certain kinds of vehicles or surfaces that are just going to be easier. Yeah. And it might be, send it without, the chrome on here or this and that. So the guy who wraps it doesn't have to worry about taking the logo off and putting it back on. So I was really surprised that they're going now with the letters in the back rather than the logo. Tesla, I'm like, more parts and processes. Why are you doing that? Yeah. And when they wrap it, the guys have to take that off and then put the wrap job on there and stick it back on again. So you're just making it harder for them. So, but I remember there were cars. I don't know if you can do it with a Tesla, but I remember you could get like Audis and BMWs, and you can get them without any lettering on there whatsoever. So it's like this incognito mode. No one can tell what the brand is, what the model is. And then they had the blacked out lights and all that other stuff, which is like not code anywhere, but because they wanted to be like Knight Rider or something like that, and no one would notice them.
Well, and the funny thing is, everyone's up in arms about the fact that there's no paint, but then what's the popular thing to do these days is to do that gunmetal, just like get that no reflective, like super flat looking paint on all these cars. And I'm like, well, you're that's most of the way towards a stainless steel exterior anyway at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
and speaking of paint, this is a little bit odd. Is the most popular color Tesla is like white.
Yeah.
So you want to have something, because it gets very confusing, and that's because people don't have to pay any extra for it. The white is one color you get. And then of course the Celestiq, the picture of the Celestiq out in the wild, and it was the color white, and it just was like so ugly. It's like, But how
Hey,
can you design a car where the color white is like the ugliest color?
yeah, exactly. I got to see a Celestique in person in Vancouver of all the crazy things.
It was unbelievable. I mean, and it lived up to its expectations because I was saying, wait a minute, that's like based on the old Chevy Caprice, which had the most ugly back end of any vehicle ever. And it's like, oh, it's absolutely inspired by it. But at least, you know, the original shots was purple or something. Right. And looking at white, and again, I'm joking. It's like, wait, isn't the white like the combination of all colors? So therefore, if it looks bad in white, it looks bad in every color. There's no doubt about it.
Well,
it reminded me of those Caprice hearse like conversions.
Yes,
they were ugly. Exactly. They were so ugly.
I think the one that I saw, the butt rear end of it did not look as bad in person as it does in pictures. So I will give them that. Did it look like a $350,000 car? Because inside there was a Bentley. I think it was a
the
Bentley
camera
conversion.
always adds 300 pounds,
exactly.
Right?
The camera makes the back end look a little bigger. But I was just saying there was a high-end car sales place that was inside the show, and they had a lavender pink Bentley. I think it was a conversion, so it was like an EV version, but that was $350,000. I was like, wait a second. So for the same price as this, you know, kind of like mid-level looking a Cadillac car, I could get a Bentley. I was like, of course I'd get a Bentley. It's no choice.
Yeah, it is kind of a crazy price, and you don't know how reliable it's going to be at first. You want to be the first one to own one of those things. It's like, and because, you know, everyone that bought like the first Mach-E is like, oh, you know, maybe it's a nice car now, but they had all sorts of issues with it. You know, the original Lucids. I mean, even Elon said like, I would never buy the first Teslas off the line. You're kidding. It's a pure headache. So it's like, I'm kind of glad my Cybertruck reservation is like 1,300,000. I think all the bugs will be worked out by that time.
Actually, that's a good question. Now, so let me ask you guys, how many Cybertrucks produced this year and how many Cybertrucks produced in 2024? Like at a guess. I know we're just speculating and just spitballing here, but
we should know. We've gone over this on Yaman's channel, you know, and we've got coffee bets on this one.
I have.
Man, it's like, you got to look up the coffee bet to make sure that, you know, you don't contradict yourself here.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, because I know that I actually have, I want to say that I predicted 500,000 units in 2027.
Okay. But I'm thinking about like, what is next year's ramp? Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about 20,000, 50,000? Like,
oh no, I think it should be higher than that. I mean, by the end of this year, it's a couple of thousand. The question is it 5,000 or 10,000? I think the coffee bets are somewhere around there. And then the ramp next year, you know, they should probably be able to get close to 100,000, I would think.
Okay.
That's kind of my guess. You know, it just, there's sort of two things at play here. One is it's a completely new vehicle design and everything, and there could be all kinds of hiccups.
Yes.
But they've learned so much from the ramp ups of everything else. Because even then, like the Model Y was pretty smooth compared to the Model 3.
Right.
Even though it's something different. So they kind of knew how to get that up and going. And the fact that it's something new is like, oh, doing this all over again. But it may be that they learned their lessons, and there's something about this platform that once they get it started, turns out to be really easy to do. Much easier than we think. So the ramp up can go super fast.
I think that they've also been smart enough this time not to promise people that it was going to, you notice that the delivery event has been pushed back, you know, pretty far. I think that they are not trying to make the same mistake they did with the Model 3, which was saying like, yeah, you get it next week. And then it's like, no, you won't. It's going to be 6 months or a year, you know, so they're not over promising right now. I think that they're waiting until they really feel that they have the production process working before they even announce it, so that they can not release 20 of them and then everybody's waiting for 3 months or 4 months to get the first actual like real shipments. I think they don't want to do that. I think they would like to be able to like just take off and start ramping immediately. That'd be my guess, at least.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I've been really impressed with the number of Cybertrucks that we're seeing that are coming off the line at this point already. You know, it's far ahead of how many I would expect them to be able to produce in these little test batches at this point in time. So that's a really good sign.
How many a day are coming out now? Do you know the number?
Yeah, I don't know the number. I feel like usually when you see a picture, they're loading a couple of haulers, and so maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 a day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that means they may have produced somewhere between 300 and 500 at this point.
Right, but
I
mean,
really ramping,
5 to 10 a day. Well, heck, I mean that's the quarterly production of the Hummer, so they're doing pretty well.
Yeah,
it's about the same size vehicle, so they're actually producing. Yeah, they're doing 90 times better than GM apparently. So there you go. They're already winning. But
the thing is, we don't know what batteries they're using in there for sure, do we?
No.
Is it? We don't know 2170. Yeah, because that could be what limits it. The 4680s are actually going into vehicles, correct?
Yeah.
So you can get wise with them.
Yeah. They did call it the Cyber Cell on the new, like the second generation 4680 battery. So, I mean, based on that, I kind of have to assume that the Cybertrucks are going to be made purely with 4680. And Drew has also made comments that, they were trying to ramp the 4680 lines ahead of Cybertruck production.
Okay.
So that they had some buffer for that.
Because that could be then the limiting factor again, if they're not really able to get the cell production out of it. So some of those cells have been going in Model Ys, but there's so many different things you can throw in the Model Ys now. It doesn't matter. So if they need to divert that production then over the Cybertruck, they will do it.
Well,
but I don't think they have enough production for like 500,000 Cybertrucks next year.
Has Tesla gotten to the point where they're building the Model Y with a structural 2170 battery pack or not? Because that seems to be, because if they were able to do that, then they could be pretty agnostic. They could
absolutely.
use whatever form factor they want. And so like the cheaper version of the Cybertruck, although that might be an eventual, I have a feeling whatever the most expensive trim is going to, like the either 3 or 4 motor version is going to be the first one out because it's the most profitable.
Yeah, but you think the 500-mile range will be first?
Oh, yeah,
the feeling is going to be 300.
That's
so
true.
I agree. They're going to go for as high a trim as possible, except for the range,
right?
Because they want to hold on to the batteries.
Yeah, so that's true. It might be the 2 motor version. It's like 300-mile range. So yeah, that is true. Just to be able to produce more vehicles. On the other hand, if there's another bottleneck someplace that's actually causing the problems and not the batteries, then I would see them. So we actually might get a clue about where the bottleneck is based on which trim they release first. So yeah, that'd be interesting. If it really is the batteries, then they'll probably be trying to do the lower lower pack size and get out more trucks.
So one other question to pull in here that kind of ties into our production discussion is, what are y'all thinking about the release of the $25,000 car and the Robotaxi timeline now that, so we've heard rumors that Mexico is being slowed down, but potentially they're actually speeding up in Austin. What is the timeline that was kind of set at, I guess that was shareholder day, right? Not, or was it? No, that was investor day with Tom Jew when he was talking about wanting to have cars coming off the line in roughly a year. Do we think that's still possible, but just in Austin now, or sped up, slowed down? How does all that fit into this?
I think that's interesting because the unboxing process we thought was going to be sort of exclusively or maybe initially down there, but then we hear everything else that Elon wants everyone, the engineers and the designers, close to where the production is going to be, and no one's really willing to relocate down there. So the initial lines are going to be down there. So that means they must be building up a new line in Austin, which is going to be based on that process, which makes sense. And then they get that right. So they might be sort of, it's okay if we kind of slow walk it down there because suppliers are taking their time. And there's probably all sorts of things. So it might have been super optimistic to do in 18 months. But let's just say, forget about the 18 months that they were talking about for setting up a new gigafactory, but just think about that now as the timeline for what they want to do in Austin and start pumping something out there. And the only question is, what are the numbers they want to get out of Austin at that point? Is it a line that's going to produce, the same is like SNX or something like that, or is it something that's really going to crank them out in the order of, a couple 100,000 a year? And it may be that the unboxing process is just so efficient that it just, you just cranks them out. There's nothing you do to stop it. It just goes, there's no bottlenecks in there. And then they're like, and sometimes that's one of those, let's say ace in the holes you kind of have, that if someone is slow walking it on regulation somewhere else and say, yeah, you know what, we don't really need you that much down there. Then things suddenly start getting moving, because you realize that they can go ahead and produce it in Austin anyway. But I think the reason they wanted to be down in Mexico was not so much to produce this car for the American market, but to produce it for the South American market. And the fact that Mexico has all these free trade agreements with other countries that the U.S. does not have. So that's the way to export it out is through there. And that they weren't coming north anyways. So now the question is like, okay, so are you then selling them into Mexico? And, maybe parts of Canada might be interested in a $25,000 vehicle. Will the U.S. be? And I think the U.S. will be. I think there's a lot of people that the car will be the right size. I mean, just look around when you do your daily commutes into there. It's not like everything is a giant SUV. A lot of people are driving, sedans and stuff. They're not driving American sedans. And the reason why they're not driving American sedans is because American OEMs gave up on that market a few years ago. They just won't produce. They just decided there's not enough profit in there, that all the other OEMs have been able to do that. But so don't look at the offerings from Ford and GM and Chrysler when you start looking at small vehicles. Start looking at the others and you'll see that they're out there, and there's a lot of people that buy them because that's the only car they can afford. And it does exactly what they need it for. Gets them to work, gets them back from work, gets the kids to school without a whole lot of fuss and without a whole lot of, gas or anything like that.
Well, especially when you throw in an EV tax credit on top of a $25,000 starting price, and you're looking at, if it's far enough into the future where they've reduced that number down, maybe it's $20,000. But if $7,500 is still on the table, starting at $17,500, I mean, with financing, someone could take that car home for between $200 and $300, probably less than $400 a month with insurance, fuel. Like, they could offer a bundle that's sub $400 a month that would have all transportation costs, including insurance, all as one package.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think someone was complaining about, the savings that gas savings you get on the Model 3 that was like on the Tesla website. And it only looked out maybe like 3 years or something like that. And someone's like, wait a minute, there's way more. And then if you extend it out to like 10 years, which is a lot of people do, it's a lot of money that you save. And it's almost like, whoa, that money is like enough to pay for the car that I bought in the first place. So, I
don't know what gas is where y'all are at, but mine is like $3.50 today.
I have no idea because I haven't had to buy gas such a long time.
Yeah, it's very nice not to. I actually can look though, because I give them my information about where I am, and charging statistics for the year. It says I've saved $3,077. So if you multiply that by 5 years, that's 15 grand. That comes pretty close to paying off a $15,000. If it's, sorry, Hans, I think you're muted. Sorry.
No, go for it. Yeah, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, if you buy a car that's say $25,000, you get $7,500 tax break. You own it for like 6 or 7 years. Just the savings of money of gas by itself would be enough to pretty much pay the car off. And it's not like gas is going to get cheaper. So at least not substantially. I mean, obviously it goes like this, but
it's going to be really weird.
It'll probably get very cheap for a little while, actually, of what happens because the demand
then it could go the other way. That when demand goes down so much and the supply gets choked off, then it becomes like a novelty.
Yeah, exactly.
So absolutely. Who knows what's going on? And that's why a lot of people are probably reluctant to say what the savings is going to be over 10 years, because who knows, gas prices may be forced to come down so that the remaining ICE vehicles are somehow competitive with EVs. I would not be surprised to see something. Now, we're always going to need a certain amount of fossil fuels just to be able to produce, our plastics and a lot of other things, unless alternatives are being able to be discovered, which there may be, because there are people coming up with alternatives to plastic as well. But there is always going to be something, and it's just going to be like some weird, oh yeah, we'll just produce some gasoline here for the old timers for the antique show, so they can show that the car works.
Well, you know, I was at again, sorry, I just keep mentioning this because I was there, but there was cool stuff, and one of them was a 1912 electric vehicle that was still operational, but it was like a lithium phosphate chemistry that they used for the batteries. It was not lead acid, and so they had to find the batteries. The only place that made that chemistry anymore is a company in China. But so, you know, I'm just saying, like, even when gas becomes kind of a specialty thing, it's still going to be a big deal because, of course, plastics and stuff, you have to use oil to make that. But even at some point in the future, you'll still be able to go out and buy gas for your weird old vintage car or something in 50 or 60 years. But it will be an unusual thing by then. That's for sure.
Yes, quite unusual. Yeah. And the thing is, I don't know how some of these older vehicles are able to run on modern gasoline, because I don't know, some of them actually require leaded gas.
I think they do. I think you have to put an additive in.
Yeah, exactly. So
100 years. Okay, see, there you go. 100 years of plastics. That's actually good to know, because, you know, that people say like, oh, we got to drill it for plastics anyway. And I'm like, well, I'd much rather have 100 years of plastics than just burning it. Because even with this, if you need to badly enough, you can figure out how to recycle this to some extent. You can't do once you burn it, it's gone. It's like poof, it's just in the atmosphere. So, yep.
All right. Well, I think that's all that I had that I wanted to make it through today. Are there any other things that y'all wanted to talk about before we part ways for today?
We'll make a couple little pitches here.
Okay.
You know, because we didn't touch on Optimus. You know, that's usually
teaser,
my bailiwick. And yes. If a lot of the audience is on the Tesla showroom near you, there's a good chance there's an Optimus robot. It just hasn't been well advertised. So I was actually like asking around stuff like that and called Tesla, and they're like, "Oh no, there's none in your area." And it turns out they've been in my area for like 3 weeks. And so I've already seen two of Glenn Cook, who John and I know pretty well. I think he's seen a few more because he's been around different parts of Florida. So there's like Tampa, Jacksonville, where I met Chuck Cook up there to take a look, because I thought that was the only one in the state. And I got there and they're like, "Oh yeah, they got them everywhere else. It's been here 3 weeks." There's, you know, Miami, Orlando, for sure. And it seems like if they have foot traffic of at least 5,000 per day going by, which usually means the Tesla shop in the mall, it's the only way you're really going to get that. They have one, and they're kind of a mannequin, so it's not the real Optimus, but it's pretty close to the, you know, dimensionally correct, and you can kind of take a look at it and understand how it works. So that can be a fun outing for the kids, and we're trying to actually make an outing of it here in Florida. Is at the 24th of September. 24th of September, I'll be playing at the Florida Mall. So we'll be up there for a Tesla Owner Club, and then if there's any other Tesla Owner Clubs out there where you have one nearby, and we're willing to arrange to transport me up there, I'm more than willing to go and like kind of talk about it. And so I've tried to put together a video on it and a few other things to be able to give people explanations in the background on it. And the other thing that we can tease, John, is, I don't know, is it going to be tomorrow's episode?
Yep.
Yeah. We went into Walter Isaacson's book back here, and it's made up of lots of very short chapters. So when I was told it's like chapter 7, it's like, oh, awesome, a chapter on it. And I read it, and it's like, it's 4.5 pages, you know? Yeah. It's like, there's not enough. And so there's like, it's like every chapter ends with this cliffhanger, which you never find out the answer. It's like, that's it. I want more. So, however, it does tease a lot of very interesting information about Optimus, and we go through and sort of talk about the evolution of the whole project. And I guess, I don't know what kind of language you want to use about this. How did you describe all the projects that kind of go on in Tesla? It's like,
you mean the Skunk Works kind of
roughshod?
Roughshod. I had a roughshod. I mean, you can use some more colorful terms in there, but it's like, you know, kind of a bit of a circus where like it seems like nobody knows what they're doing to begin with, and everyone just kind of volunteers.
The technical term for it is Charlie Foxtrot, and if you know, you know.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay. Exactly. And I had the assumption that the whole Optimus project was like really well organized from the beginning. And there's a lot more groundwork and everything else. And you read Walter Isaacson's book and your first thing is like, oh my God, it's like, this is going to be a complete disaster. I'm completely, but then somehow they pull the rabbit out of the hat every time.
Right.
And the more I look at it, it's more, it's you almost want to take a bunch of people that don't know, that are skilled or smart people that, come from a variety of backgrounds and know absolutely nothing about the topic and have them figure it out. And you'll be surprised. You might end up coming up with something better rather than all these experts who spent their whole career on it, who are obsessed that this is a particular way you're doing it. So there was like no egos involved and everything else, and just people really, pulling hard one direction.
Well, and there's also the naivety of not knowing what you can't do is very valuable sometimes.
Which is sometimes better.
Yeah, the experts would go like, you can't do that.
Walking, do you know how hard that is? That's nuts. Put wheels in the thing. You don't even try to do walking, and they know absolutely nothing. And they start out, it's like, oh, we're starting to walking. This is pretty hard, and they're trying to figure a few things out. And like within 2 months, they get the thing walking. Yeah. I'm looking, it's like, how did these people figure it out? They are geniuses. We just don't know it. They really, really are. So when you get that impression, it's remarkable. So the Optimus team is they are really doing something amazing that they've been able to pull it off. And again, when I had seen a lot of things in the design, and when I saw the Optimus model live again and looked at it, then I realized that, oh man, there is a lot more elegance and genius in here than I originally appreciated. It starts to come through. So I'd love to see, the real deal, because that's going to probably be something really impressive.
Yeah, I'll actually be in Dallas, I think, on the 22nd. And so there's a Tesla store in the mall there in Dallas.
There's two. There's in Plano also.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, that might be closer to where I'm going to be now that I think about it. Yeah, because the North Park one is going to be...
so it's going to be really convenient for you. John, you still have to come down to the Florida Mall. You're invited. Come on down.
I'm guessing at this point that there is one in Atlanta somewhere. I just don't know.
They just won't tell you. You just
somebody tell me.
Nobody knew. Nobody knew. And I'm checking in Orlando, and no one's going there. And I'm asking Bearded Tesla, does he know? Oh, I've been told there's nothing. And the next thing I know, I'll show him his picture of the mugs with he and his wife. He's like, hey, look what we found in the Florida Mall. I was like, great source of intelligence here, Bearded. Come on, you can do better next time.
Gotta help.
You'll just have to go on a road trip to all of them one day.
Oh yeah, man,
I mean, they got one in Charlotte, John. They must have one. They must have one up by you.
There's got to be one in Atlanta somewhere. I just have not heard.
Yeah, it's in a showroom. It's not going to be in a service center or something like that. They don't have enough foot traffic.
Yep. I'll. You know what I'll do? There's only that. I think there's maybe 3 in Atlanta. So I'll just call them. I'll just get on the line and say like, hey, you got an Optimus? Anybody got a bot?
You know how hard it is to call the service center? The next thing you know, you're Tesla corporate. Oh, I was like, I want to talk to someone in that office.
Exactly. I'll just tell them I want to buy a car. That usually puts them online. They usually come right online at that point. So, all right, cool.
All right. Well, looking forward to watching that episode tomorrow. And always love the conversations that y'all have about both, the AI things, Optimus. It's been an incredible journey to watch what Tesla's doing, and then love the way that y'all break it down for us so that we can understand it and make it a little bit more accessible. So, all right. Well, thank you to everyone who has spent the afternoon with us, and hopefully y'all got a little bit smarter today. I don't know if we made you as brighter as Herbert might have, but we will catch y'all next time.